Hi, and welcome to the IT Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 93. What can self-checkout lanes teach us about compliance readiness? So, self-checkout lanes. Oh my God. I hate self-checkout lanes. I like self-checkout lanes because it gives me the ability to scan and check out my own stuff. Like I can scan, boop, and pay instantly, and there not be any issue with, having to talk with a person who is obviously disinterested in what I have to say, or getting some awkward conversation about, I don't know, the way my face looks. It's just I prefer self-checkout because I'm quicker. I'm quicker to scan and pay for my items than the cashier will ever be. I can scan, bag, and pay faster than the cashier can simply scan all of the stuff, which is how it should be, right? Like that should be an opinion I think everybody should share. Self-checkout is for people who can check out faster than the cashier. Now, what is super aggravating, I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but it always seems like it to me when it seems like just about every other person that gets up to the self-checkout lane gets up there and scans their stuff. They forget how checkout lanes work. They forget how payment works because they are totally unprepared with their payment method. They don't have their credit card out. They don't have their cash out, whatever. They're trying to pay by check, fucking whatever. They're just totally unprepared to process their transaction through the self-checkout lane, which is crazy because it's maddening. It's frustrating. It's so goddamn annoying because this is supposed to be something that you are prepared for. Like, you don't walk up to the self-checkout lane. You shouldn't walk up to the self-checkout lane without being prepared for the steps involved in the process. Additionally, following through the self-checkout lane, you should be prepared to follow the rules. Like, hey, scan one item at a time. You fuck up enough times, the machine goes, hey, I don't know that this person knows what the fuck they're doing. I have to call a cashier over, which stops the entire process. And so, I know it's something small, something tiny, but it is an irritant of mine. Obviously, I hate when other people use the self-checkout line and they are totally unprepared for how the fuck it works. Whether it be the grocery store or a goddamn gas station or, whatever. If there's a self-checkout, I'm going to use it, but I can almost guarantee that I'm going to get annoyed about what people are or how people are using it. That might be more a reflection on my ability to be patient with standard people, but I'd like to think that some of it is justified because what the fuck? Really? Like, this is, self-checkout's been a thing for 20 years now, almost. And there is no reason why it should be something that is new. Like, I don't anticipate any, Amish or, any Amish person walking up to a grocery store and suddenly going, you know what, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this newfangled thing. Everybody who is in a Target or King Soopers or, a gas station, a Mavericks, they've seen these things. They know how they work, or at least they should. And so it shouldn't be anything brand new. They should be I don't know, I've never seen it scattered before. Oh my gosh, how does this fucking work? But it never fails. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something else going on in their lives. Maybe they have a deathly fear of lasers. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, the whole point being is that when you are attempting to check out from purchasing your goods, when you're walking to the self-checkout line, there are a lot of steps that you have to have in preparation in order to make the transaction smooth and easy. One is you need to make sure you have all of your items in order like in a capability to scan or be scanned or processed through the transaction. You might have some produce that requires the produce code that you have to search through their system. However that system works on the checkout screen, you might have to search by picture or by name, and the touch screen might be a little iffy, and so that might take you a little bit of time, but you still have to figure out how to buy these goddamn oranges that don't seem to exist on the list. Additionally, you have to make sure that each and every item gets scanned and place it in the bagging area one by one. Because if you don't do that, like if you have 5 of the same item and you scan one and then you put all 5 of them over there and you're just trying to scan the one item, the video sensor on there is going to be like, hey, this guy's only scanning one item and he's trying to scan the same item every time. And it's going to alert the folk, the checkout people, the checkout police, the checkout Nazi. Yeah, the checkout Nazi. No receipt for you. Anyway, the whole point being that you have to have all these things in order. You have to know how to process them. And then when you are ready to complete the transaction, you must have your payment method ready, whether that be cash or card, your phone, gold bullion, barter system. I don't fucking know. But you got to have that payment system ready and in a method that the system can process and also follow the directions. Meaning when it says scan card, you don't look at your card to see what the numbers are on it. You put it on the scanner. I don't know how much clearer that can be, but maybe I just trust the fact that it's supposed to be intuitive. Anyway, whole point being that when you're doing all this, you have to have a level of preparation for your checkout. So it's very similar to compliance. Whatever your compliance framework is for your organization, you should be ready for that compliance framework. And if you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about with compliance framework, congratulations for ignoring as much about compliance as I've talked about it in the past, if you've listened to this podcast before. But compliance frameworks and compliance is the concept that organizations have to follow a specific kind of compliance in order to maintain business, in order to operate in a specific way. So for instance, if you take payment cards as part of your business model, say you're selling goods and or services, you have to take payment somehow. And in order to take payment, you have to process that payment through some sort of system, whether or not it be credit card, checks, cash, whatever. But processing payment requires some level of that. Now, if you're taking payment cards, you fall under a compliance framework called PCI DSS. This is a payment card industry standards where you have to follow specific security frameworks depending on how you process that data. So if you're taking payment card information, you have to basically follow specific rules. And there are further requirements if you store payment card information. So for instance, if you have, if you're a hotel and you store credit card information on site so that you can process additional transactions against the guests' cards, that information has to get stored in a very specific way and must be accessible only in a very specific way. So this is all in effect for the payment card industry to maintain security and make sure that their customers' credit card information isn't being stolen. Because if their information gets stolen, credit cards that money does have to come from somewhere because they're not going to charge their customers that money. They can't. I'm sure there are horror stories, and maybe many of you have them, where your credit card company has not refunded you 100% of the money that was stolen from you if you've lost control of a credit card. But for the most part, credit card companies will give 100% of the money that has been charged fraudulently against a card. And the way that Visa and MasterCard, Discover, and all those other card companies do this and how they pay for it is they end up charging the card processor who processed the fraudulent card or who lost control of the card. They will increase their transaction rate percentage because Visa, MasterCard, Discover, they all take a percentage of each transaction off the top, and that's how they make money. So the worse your security rating is, or the worse your rating with the credit card company is, the higher percentage you pay. And so this is a concept that is obviously very, very well known. And you can look at all of these ratings and how they come about with the interest rate calculation for yourself if you would like. But in the end, this is all handled. The payment card industry kind of handles all of this by requiring that you go through PCI DSS compliance. And right now we're on PCI DSS 4.0, and it requires a lot of different things. It requires timeouts on computers. Each user has to have their own account. Accounts must be secured with a password. I believe they're forcing multi-factor authentication for most accounts. They require that any system that secures or houses credit card information must be on its own network. Any device that takes payment card information must be on its own network, must be isolated away from standard production traffic, things like that. So these are all checkboxes that have to be made in PCI DSS. But there are a ton of other compliance frameworks. There's NIST 80171, ISO 27001, ISO 42000. There's not NIST, ISO 42000, maybe I said that already. There's HIPAA, there's CMMC, GDPR. I know I'm just saying a bunch of letters, and half of you wouldn't know if I was talking about the alphabet or just spouting nonsense. But in general, these are all just different compliance frameworks. And the vast majority of these compliance frameworks are kind of no question you have to follow them if you're going to do business in that circumstance. For instance, if you're doing anything regarding banking information, like direct banking information, meaning like account numbers and ACH transfers, wire transfers, anything like that, you have to follow underneath what is something that is called SOX compliance. That is another whole thing. But there's also like the FTC and SEC have specific requirements for trading organizations or for organizations that trade on their stock platforms. They must also follow a specific security practice for their information. These are just all different security platforms, compliance frameworks. And the end all be all is that when you are working through these compliance frameworks, you often have to have something that is called compliance readiness, and you have to do a assessment against your organization. Now, with some of those assessments can be voluntary or they can be self-assessments, such as HIPAA. HIPAA has no requirement for a third party to validate that you are HIPAA compliant. You can do a self-assessment and have that self-assessment ready to go. But there are other organizations that require you to have a third party do your assessment. CMMC requires a 3PAOC third party. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, and I'm too lazy to look it up. But basically, it's a third party that validates that you are compliant. And then with PCI DSS 4.0, you have to have a third party who does a penetration test. You can do the rest of the compliance framework by yourself, but you do have to have a third party do that penetration test. And And so with a lot of these, organizations, a lot of organizations, especially those with their own compliance departments, usually decide to perform those compliance frameworks by themselves. But in the end, what the problem is with that is often because of the level of detail that you have to go into with these compliance frameworks, a lot of organizations will just check the box. Of course we have that. Yeah, of course we're following this guideline. Yeah, of course we've got antivirus on stuff. We've got Windows Defender, right? That's good enough. We've got an EDR. We've got advanced protection on all of our workstations. And people will just, check the box and move on. And that's okay. But if you actually go through the entire process and say you're an organization that actually gives a shit about compliance frameworks, or let's say you're a payment card, you're a business that actually takes payment cards and you had undisclosed or uncontrolled disclosure of consumer payment card information, and you're now having to pay a higher rate to, you're having to pay 15% in transaction fees to Visa and MasterCard. Maybe now you're like, oh shit, maybe I need to get somebody else to help me with this so I can understand exactly what I'm doing. So you go and hire a third party to do your compliance readiness. And so if you're going to do compliance readiness, whether you're going to do it with a third party or not, or what you're going to do it yourself, you're going to do it with a third party, you need to have a specific amount of stuff. You need to be prepared with a certain amount of stuff beforehand. And so, you need to be prepared for the policies that you're going to need for the framework. You should be prepared for all of the technical controls that you need to have, whether it be policies or frameworks or, logging data, any of that. You're going to have that information kind of ready up front. And the reason is that you're going to want to have this stuff available to include with your compliance framework so that you can quickly get through it. And this is why it is beneficial to have a third party organization help you with your readiness for your organization. Because if you don't, it can take you fucking 18 months to generate all of the documentation that you might need for a compliance framework, because you're also trying to run a business or, do your job. And so having to do that, having to generate 300 pages worth of documentation on top of doing your regular job can be a pain in the ass. And so having somebody whose job it is to just create those 300 documents, who might have already have experience to generate those documents and know how they have to be worded and whatnot, can be beneficial to you. And it can make that process a lot smoother. And for the vast majority of compliance frameworks, you only have to do it once, because the next year that you do it, you just submit everything that you created the year before. And that makes it really quick, makes that checkout process extremely quick. You no longer have to wait to scan each and every item. You can just be like, nope, this is the same order as last time, and walk through the door. That'd be nice if it works that way. But anyway, the whole point being that you don't have to process each page, each thing every time you do a compliance framework. If the compliance framework hasn't changed or changed very little, or it's changed but you already satisfy the requirements because you were paying attention, that can make the entire process very quick. And that can save you a lot of heartache and a lot of stress and a lot of issues going forward, because of things like PCI DSS and those compliance frameworks that you have to go work through. If you craft your compliance documents in a specific way, keep them in a specific way, it makes it super easy for you to just be like, yep, here it is. I've got everything. I've said it. I can provide everything in detail for each and every step, and I can move on with the rest of my life and be confident that I am at least following the minimum requirements for this compliance framework. And so, I guess I should cover what the dangers of not following compliance frameworks can be, because, it does matter. And a lot of people often, rightly so, ask the question. It's not enough to say, yeah, you have to do HIPAA because the government kind of requires you to do it, because they honestly don't really. They're called HIPAA guidelines. It's not HIPAA requirements. It's called HIPAA guidelines. And there's a reason for that. And so not following compliance frameworks can lead to a lot of things. CMMC, which is a compliance framework specifically associated with things like government contractors doing work for the Department of Defense, there is data that is called confidential unclassified information. Yeah, confidential unclassified information, CUI, which is basically any piece of information that the government might not want out into the public. They want to maintain control of it, but it doesn't have a classification such as top secret, classified, any of that. So that information needs to be stored and protected in a very particular way. And if you, as a government contractor, are not following CMMC or have not performed your CMMC compliance and haven't achieved a compliance level of CMMC, you will lose your contract with the government, which is probably a significant portion of your income. So you want to make sure that you're ready for that. Other things like PCI DSS, we've already covered. You will pay a higher rate on every transaction to MasterCard and Discover. And some of you might be like, "Oh, well, I don't give a shit. I'll just pass that cost on to my customer." And to that, I have to say, fuck you. Just fuck you right the hell off if you're going to do that. I mean, seriously. That's a douchebag move, man. HIPAA requirements. If you are HIPAA guidelines, rather, said the R word. HIPAA guidelines are there to maintain security. If you don't follow them and you suffer a breach of protected health information, you can have a fine levied against you from the OCR. And this fine is basically it's a penalty. It's a fine for not following the guidelines. And it's on an almost arbitrary scale based on how much effort you put into following guidelines. And so if you didn't follow the guidelines at all and you made no effort to improve year over year, the OCR is going to be a lot heavier handed on punching you in the face with a fine than if you had given even any semblance of an attempt to make sure you were secure. So, those are some of the penalties. There are others associated with others. Some of them are purely voluntary, like ISO 27001 really is purely voluntary, but your organization might have some requirement from a customer or upstream vendor or something to maintain ISO 27001. But, there are also a lot of voluntary compliance frameworks. And so, if you have a requirement or if you're going for a compliance framework or you're trying to follow these compliance frameworks and you need to submit your stuff, if you're not ready to process that by having these policies and procedures and technical controls all in a row, all ready to go, all ready to scan into the system, it's going to slow up your ability to do that. And it's going to keep you at the checkout counter longer and longer. And I don't know about you, but I have a job. I have a whole other job I have to do other than compliance. And so I'm going to want to make sure that I spend as little time doing compliance, scanning each and every item as possible. So I'm going to have all of it ready as much as I can. I'm going to have every document ready that I need. I'm going to have every screenshot that I need ready. I'm going to have every, piece of evidence that I can submit ready to go for my compliance framework. So that way I'm not stuck waiting on myself or waiting for the checkout counter to call the cashier or the cashier to come over and tell me what I need to do in order to make the machine process the next step. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen, so that in the end, I can get through, pay for my shit, and walk out of that building so I can get on with the rest of my life and do my job. And I hope you guys have a great day. That's all I got time for. Thanks.